What's going on? Welcome into the Thursday show of the Fantasy Football Show. It is October 29th, 2020. And starting off today's show, we have a lot of news and notes and storylines going into this Thursday, given the Wednesday practice reports mostly with injured players and some COVID news as well. Starting off, McCaffrey is looking like a no-go according to Tom Pelissaro for tonight's game. Despite all of the jersey situations with the non-contact, the contact, it's looking like the Panthers are going to hold him out for tonight's game against the Falcons, which I think is a good idea. Give him another week of rest and make sure he's 100% coming back into Week 9. Aaron Jones, this is pretty notable. He did not practice on Wednesday with his calf. It's not looking good for him to play this week. I originally thought this would be a minor injury and could play last week, but he didn't. This just means pick up Jamal Williams to me as insurance. They have a good matchup against Minnesota this week. And Jamal Williams could be due for another big game like last week if Aaron Jones is to miss. However, if Aaron Jones does play, the Packers are notorious for being pretty conservative with their injuries. And so if he is a full go, I would play him. I don't think they would have any worries with him getting re-injured. Next on the list, we have Joe Mixon. He was also did not practice on Wednesday. He has a foot injury. We don't know much about because they haven't said much. This is just something to monitor for today and tomorrow when we get more practice reports. But Giovanni Bernard will be a good play if Joe Mixon was to miss. Chris Carson, also another, did not practice on Wednesday. Seattle have a positive outlook for this injury, but Stefania Bell this morning on the Fantasy Focus show on ESPN said that she would be surprised if he plays, and I kind of trust her opinion on this because this is an injury that can really slow a player down, and if it is not fully healed, it could really jeopardize long-term health. This was shown through Cam Newton's injury last year, and it ended his season after about the third week, I believe. Carlos Hyde and Travis Homer also did not practice, and DJ Dallas was the only healthy running back for Seattle who practiced Wednesday. So that is important to note. Keep an eye on this. If none of the other three running backs practice this whole week, DJ Dallas is looking like a good play, as he will be literally the only healthy running back. Pay attention if they activate anyone off of their practice squad to play. I think that will indicate some uncertainty in Chris Carson, Carlos Hyde, and Travis Homer's health. Moving on to Dalvin Cook. He was limited this Wednesday at practice. However, he's looking good to play this Sunday. He had the bye week last week. He had the week off. I think he's good to play, and he could have a huge week, as we will get into later in this show. Tevin Coleman is designated to return from IR this week, but that doesn't mean that he will play. The 49ers lead the league in fantasy points, which proves what we know, that this 49ers running back position is incredibly, it's worth a lot. Whoever is healthy will have great fantasy output. The 49ers, is good to note that the 49ers do like Hasty. And last week I watched a game against New England, and Hasty looked really good. And McKinnon right now isn't very trustworthy for fantasy owners, as he was healthy last week but only got 3 carries and was not very efficient. Jamal Hasty is looking like a good play against Seattle, who is about middle of the road, I believe 18th in fantasy points given up to running backs. And this 49ers offense is run through the ground, and they're good at what they do, and they stick to that. Allen Robinson still in concussion protocol. I touched on this yesterday. If he does miss I would stay away from the Chicago offense entirely. Just pay attention to his practice reports the rest of the week. Mooney is a rookie. He looks good for the future. He could break out near the end of the season. But yeah, Allen Robinson's the only piece in this offense that I would even want. Emmanuel Sanders still on the COVID-19 reserve list. He said in a podcast, I believe it was his own, he said, quote, "I will miss 2 games." So he's not looking like he will play this week. Michael Thomas, a huge question mark for this entire season. He did not practice Wednesday. Just something to monitor the rest of the week. I don't really know what's going on with Michael Thomas. It's an interesting situation, and I know fantasy owners aren't very happy with what they have gotten out of him, which really wasn't much in the first week. Future is in question for sure. Deontay Johnson also did not practice on Wednesday due to a toe. He said it was, quote, "a bruised ankle, no big deal. He'll play this week." Something to monitor, but I do believe that he will play this week. Moving on to some COVID news. The Giants had a positive COVID test, and they played Monday night, so this is something to keep an eye on. Again, this is something that we know was going to happen this week, or not this week, but this entire season, and it's just something to pay attention to. Talk to your owners or your league commissioner. I'm sure you've figured out a solution to these COVID issues, but just pay attention to the COVID news regarding the Giants and the Tampa Bay game as they play Monday night. Moving on and into the next piece of news, Gardner Minshew had a thumb fracture, and this kind of amplifies their head coach's statement from yesterday. He said that the future's kind of uncertain, and Gardner Minshew could be the focal point of what he was talking about. He's uncertain for week 9. They're currently on the bye this week, so it gives him some time to heal, but something for next week, and could be an interesting situation in Jacksonville in the quarterback position. So as of 12:30, there was a lot of news coming out out of New England. Julian Edelman underwent a precautionary standard knee procedure this morning. This is all quote from Adam Schefter. He's expected to this surgery procedure is expected to sideline Julian Edelman for quote some period of time, including this week. This leaves the only healthy wide receivers as of the Wednesday practice report as Damiere Byrd, Gunnar Olszewski, and Jacoby Myers. Damiere Byrd and Jacoby Myers are really the only wide receivers who have gotten any production through the air, mostly Damiere Byrd. Gunnar Olszewski has been the return specialist. This is concerning for an already depleted wide receiver room in talent and in health. This is something to pay attention to throughout the week, and it's concerning for Patriots owners and fans. And Cam's a definite downgrade with this news. Julian wasn't really getting much done through the air anyway. However, this doesn't help at all. Moving into the next part of the show, I want to talk about matchups for the remainder of the show. We're going to go through the first half of matchups, all of the noon games. We already talked about tonight's game on Thursday night between the Falcons and the Panthers, and I like the Falcons to win that game. I'm going to give you my picks to win the games, and we'll keep track of those as the season progresses. And as well, at the end, I want to talk about my starts of the week. Who's going to have great games individually? I'll give you 2 examples at each position who I like this week. And let's get into some matchups. So the first matchup we're going to talk about is the 2-4 New England Patriots go on to play away against the Buffalo Bills at 5-2. This is a 41.5 over under, and Buffalo's favored by 3.5 to win the game. I think Buffalo wins this game, especially now with the news about Julian Edelman. All of these over-unders and differentials were taken at about 10 a.m., so I'm sure this game money line and all of the betting stuff is probably changing with the Edelman news. So breaking down the quarterbacks in this matchup, Josh Allen, this is something really notable. In the past 3 weeks, he's only averaged 15 fantasy points, which is a huge difference from the first 4 weeks of averaging 30 points a game. He averaged 30 points a game through the first 4 weeks. He was going off. He was in MVP talks. Now not so much. He's cooling down. And to be honest, I don't know if he gets back on pace in this game, back to his MVP pace. I think that he has a better game than his past 3 weeks, and I just the New England defense has been fairly stingy, not as good as last year, of course. But New England is fourth best against fantasy points given up to quarterbacks, and I think that really hinders Josh Allen. But I think he gets out of the pocket and gets some rushing yards in and improves on his past 3 weeks. Now moving on to Cam. He's got a lot to prove now after last week's negative 0.2 point output and 4-point quarterback scoring. Buffalo really hasn't been the defense that we thought they were at the beginning of the season, which plays into the favor of Cam. They are 19th against fantasy quarterbacks in points given up. I think the Pats really need to focus on running the ball this game through the quarterback and through their running backs, especially now with the Edelman news. But Buffalo could just stack that box up. I think this game is going to be a defensive kind of holding out game because of the Edelman news and as well as Josh Allen's recent poor performances. This is going to be a low-scoring divisional matchup. Buffalo looking to become the kings of the AFC East. But to be the best, you got to beat the best, and that's what Buffalo fans have said. With that said, I think Buffalo gets this game done. Breaking down running backs now, New England, as far as fantasy is concerned, I don't want any of them. Buffalo is middle of the pack. They're 14th in fantasy points given up to the running back position. If I would want anyone, I would want if I would want any of the running backs out of the three with Harris, Burkhead, and White, I'd want White. He just has the PPR upside. But if it was standard, I would go with Harris because he looks really efficient on the ground. But still, he's only getting around like 30% of snaps in the past few games. Now moving on to Buffalo, the Pats are poor on run defense, and they are 20th in points giving up to running backs. The 49ers exploited this with 197 rushing yards against the New England Patriots, and 112 of them coming from Jeff Wilson. With that said, I don't like this Buffalo backfield. They're not as efficient as the 49ers. No one is. But with that said, I would rather play Devin Singletary than Moss. But with them both healthy, it hurts each of their fantasy success. Moving on to the wide receiver position, starting with New England, you have no weapons. Edelman went down. That's the news in this game. You're not playing any of these wide receivers, I don't think. With Edelman down, I don't think that upticks anyone's value. Buffalo also, to add on top of this, is 7th best against wide receivers in points per game. When I made this script, I said if I had to play one, I would play Edelman. But obviously, he is going to miss he's going to miss Sunday's game. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what Cam can do with literally no weapons. Buffalo, now they can exploit New England through the air. There's been a lot of controversy with the Stephon Gilmore trade talk before the trade deadline on November 2nd, I do believe. Um, Gilmore even had said like he put his house up for sale, and uh, he's only allowing offers. The offers will end an hour before the trade deadline is up. So very fishy, very interesting trade talk going on there. Um, but with that said, Diggs is going to be a good play. Stephon Diggs, I think, will have a good game despite most likely going up against Stephon Gilmore. And I think Cole Beasley gets it done again. He had 22 fantasy points and 100 plus receiving yards last week. And I think that he continues his hot streak from last week. Moving on to the tight end position, New England has no weapons. Buffalo, I don't want either of them. If you were to play a Buffalo tight end, like New England is still good against the tight end. They're fifth best. I don't think you're playing any tight ends unless it's a super deep league. In that case, I'd rather have Knox over Ozzy or any of the New England tight ends. So now moving into the second matchup that we're going to break down, it is the 5-1 Tennessee Titans going to Cincinnati. The Bengals are 5-1. This game has a 53.5 over under, and Tennessee are 5.5 point favorites away from home. With that said, we're going to break down the quarterback position to start off with. Ryan Tannehill for Tennessee has been hot. He is a quarterback 11 currently, a quarterback 1. He's averaged 23 points in the last 3 weeks. He has 23 points average overall. However, in the past 3 weeks, he's averaged 27. He's looking good, especially recently. And in those 3 weeks, he went up against Pittsburgh and got the job done. Cincinnati is 15th against fantasy quarterbacks, but allowed Baker to score 30 plus this past week. I think that's interesting. I think Ryan Tannehill gets the job done. I think he puts in another QB1 performance. And I think that Tennessee wins this game. I think that they get off to a hot start and kind of put this game out of reach for Cincinnati. And Joe Burrow, the next player we will break down at the Cincinnati Bengals quarterback position. He is currently the QB 16. He's looked like the real deal. I mean, he was drafted number 1 overall, and he's played like that. Maybe not as good as Justin Herbert, of course, but Joe Burrow's kind of running for his life at times, which is kind of dangerous for his long-term health. However, in this game, I think he gets the job done in garbage time especially. Last week against Cleveland, he put up 30 points. And Tennessee this season is 21st against fantasy quarterbacks and points given up. Burrow could have to come from behind in this game, and he might have to throw the ball 35 plus times. That definitely could happen. And I think that Joe Burrow profits from that and puts up another solid performance. Low in QB1 for me, high in QB2. Moving on to the running backs for Tennessee, King Henry. He's really good. That's all you need to know. You're playing him regardless of matchup. That's all you need to know. Cincinnati, Joe Mixon is questionable coming into this game, as I noted in the news part of the show. Keep an eye on his practice report if you're a Joe Mixon owner, or if Giovanni Bernard has been dropped and is on waivers. If he doesn't play, like I said, Gio's a good start. Last week he put up 20 fantasy points, and Tennessee is 15th best against running back fantasy points given up, which is average. I mean, I think you're playing either one. If Joe Mixon plays, you play him. If Gio gets the nod and Joe Mixon's out, I think you put him into your flex or RB2. Moving on to wide receivers now. Tennessee, A.J. Brown has been huge the past 3 weeks. He's played incredible. He's averaged 25 points in the past 3 weeks, which is the number one wide receiver since week 5. Cincinnati is middle of the road against wide receivers and points given up at 16. And, I mean, the question that we have to ask now is that's 3 games in a row of 22 plus. I mean, he can't boom forever, right? I mean, it's a solid question to ask. What might happen in this game, like I've touched on, is Tennessee goes up huge and they just pound it out with Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry might get 25 touches this game. However, if Cincinnati and Joe Burrow can kind of keep this close, I could definitely see A.J. Brown getting the job done once again and continuing his hot streak. Maybe not 20 plus, because I mean that's kind of outrageous to expect from every wide receiver for 4 weeks in a row. But I mean, he's shown that he can do it even against Pittsburgh last week. Now moving on to Cincinnati. Tennessee has been poor against wide receivers this season. And if there's been a storyline of the past few weeks for Cincinnati, it's been that there are 3 capable wide receivers that you could start week in, week out. Tennessee is 4th worst in fantasy points given up, so they are at 29. And Tyler Boyd and Higgins, most notably, have broken out recently, with A.J. Green trailing behind. In the past 3 weeks, Boyd is wide receiver 13 and T. Higgins is wide receiver 16. Those are 2 viable wide receiver 2s. If you have them, I think you start them because Joe Burrow will have to sling this rock around. And I think they get the job done once again. If you... cut that. Moving on now to tight ends for Tennessee. Jonnu Smith, the current tight end 6 on the season. If you have him, you're starting him. Cincinnati is 3rd worst against the tight end in fantasy points allowed. Jonnu Smith could have a decent game. I guess this all depends on the Cincinnati Bengals and their ability to keep up with Tennessee. For Cincinnati now, Sample has only 2 games with 10 plus points this season, and he could be a streaming option. However, the 3 wide receivers that we touched on, and Boyd, Higgins, and A.J. Green, they are getting most of the touches lately. I'd prefer someone else. However, Tennessee is number 26 in tight end fantasy points allowed. So if this is kind of a streaming option, if one of your guys is on bye and you're in a deeper league, I think Sample could get the job done and put in a solid week. Might get into the top 15 this week in tight ends. Moving on now to the next matchup that we will talk about today. It is the 3-3 Las Vegas Raiders meeting the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland. The Browns are 5-2 on the season. This game is a 51.5 point over under, and Cleveland are 2.5 point favorites at home. Breaking down the quarterback position to start off with. I'm going to backtrack for a second, actually. I'm going to put my pick in to win this game for Las Vegas Raiders to get the job done away from home. A lot of this kind of is depending on the back of Henry Ruggs, who we will talk about later in this matchup breakdown. So now, breaking down the quarterbacks for Las Vegas, Derek Carr. He's a good streaming option, I think, this week. Cleveland allowed 30 to Joe Burrow last week. And when Ruggs is healthy, Carr is better overall. When they took down the Kansas City Chiefs, Derek Carr had 30 points, and Henry Ruggs was healthy in that game and put in a very good performance and caught a few deep balls. And also to note, Cleveland is 23rd best against fantasy points given up to the quarterback position, which is 10th worst. So that was quick math right there. You know that. So I think that Derek Carr is a good option in this game. For Cleveland now, breaking down Baker Mayfield. He had a good game against Cincinnati, and Las Vegas isn't any better than Cincinnati is against quarterbacks. They're 29th best. Baker is a good streaming option as well, despite not having his number one weapon in Odell Beckham Jr. I think that in this game, I would rather have Derek Carr. I just trust him more. I'm not the biggest believer. Not necessarily believer in him as a player, but he's very inconsistent. Baker is, and if the Raiders get any sort of pass rush, Max Crosby has shown that he can be disruptive in the backfield. Baker could have to kind of run for his life a little bit, and I think Derek Carr gets the job done against Cleveland and wins this game for the Raiders. Moving on now to running backs. Josh Jacobs could have another poor performance. I'm kind of projecting that this week against Cleveland. Cleveland has been 12th best versus running backs, and this is kind of what I'm going to say, is I like Josh Jacobs rest of season after this game. If he doesn't perform this week, I'm going to the Josh Jacobs owner, and I'm trading for him. I think rest of the season he performs like an RB1. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Cleveland now, Kareem Hunt is in for a huge game this week. He could be the RB1 this week. He is going up against the 31st best, aka second worst run defense as far as points given up to fantasy running backs. Kareem Hunt is averaging 3 yards after contact this year, which is second best in the NFL. And Las Vegas is giving up 2.9 yards after contact, which is worse in the NFL. This is credit to Andy Holloway at Andy Holloway on Twitter. Kareem Hunt is going to go crazy this game. I think that Cleveland sticks to their game plan of pounding the rock, and Kareem Hunt gets into the end zone a few times. I think he could bust off a few, and look out for some highlight plays this week from Kareem Hunt. Moving on to wide receivers now for Las Vegas. I think Henry Ruggs is the storyline of this game for the Raiders as a wide receiver. Jared Smola tweeted out this, I believe this morning. Henry Ruggs had his highest snap rate and route rate last week and gets Cleveland this week, who is 31st ranked against wide receivers and fantasy points given up. That's huge to note. Derek Carr could hit on a few deep shots, and with Henry Ruggs taking off the top of the Cleveland defense, opens up everything down low for Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow. And Henry Ruggs could connect with Derek Carr on a few deep shots. With that said, Nelson Agholor had a big week last week with 22 points in PPR formats, and he could continue this against this poor Browns secondary. Cleveland now, they're going up against the Vegas secondary, which is 23rd best against fantasy wide receivers and points given up. Jarvis is the new wide receiver 1. I'm kind of taking this game as a bit of an experiment. I just want to sit and watch what happens without Odell. We saw it last week that the production went through the tight end, and I want to know if that continues or if it gets spread around more around Richard Higgins and as well as Peoples-Jones, and see what Jarvis can do as the wide receiver 1. Pre-Odell, Baker and Jarvis had a pretty decent connection, I believe in 2018 or 2019. Yeah, 2018, near the second half of that year as Baker started those games. I think that, I just want to watch what happens. If you have Jarvis, you're probably needing to play him, and I see him as a solid wide receiver 2 this game. Richard Higgins was the most added wide receiver out of the two of him and Peoples-Jones at plus 16% in ESPN leagues. As I said, I just want to wait and see. This is a good matchup, so I'd like to see them all perform the way that they should against this poor Raiders secondary. Tight ends now. You're playing Darren Waller if you have him. He could have a huge week with this poor Cleveland secondary. I really hope that the the Browns don't move away from their identity and keep pounding the rock with Kareem, I think he could have a huge game. Um, yeah. As I said before, for Cleveland now with the tight end position, Harrison, Bryant, and Njoku combined for 3 touchdowns last week. If you have to play one of them, I'm picking Bryant. He had the 2 touchdowns. He had more of the targets. I think this is where the OBJ production gets fulfilled. Recapping this matchup, I'm taking Las Vegas, the away team, to win this game. Moving on now to the next matchup that we will break down. This is the 4-2 Indianapolis Colts traveling to Detroit to take on the Lions at 3-3. There's a 50-point over-under with Indianapolis getting 3-point favorites away from home. Breaking down quarterbacks now, I think the Colts with Phil Rivers and Detroit, if you're streaming quarterbacks, there's better options available. Detroit's 14th best against quarterbacks in fantasy football points given up. And Stafford gets the number 1 defense against fantasy quarterbacks. There's better options in this game as far as the quarterbacks are concerned. I think the real promise in this game is through the running back position for the Colts, and that is on the back of Jonathan Taylor, the talented rookie. I think right now is where they turn his. I think right now is where the Colts turn their game plan onto the back of Jonathan Taylor. This is where he starts to perform the way that we thought that he would at the beginning of the season, I think. Well, not necessarily the beginning of the season, but after the unfortunate Marlon Mack injury. To capitalize on this, Detroit is a 28th best, aka the fourth worst against fantasy running backs in points given up. Hines as well could have a decent game. However, I think that the success in this game happens on the ground for the Colts, not through the air, as the Colts will be pounding the rock as I get ahead against the Lions, I think. Now breaking down the Detroit Lions, their backfield is kind of concerning for fantasy players and owners of Adrian Peterson and DeAndre Swift. The Indianapolis Colts are 5th best against running backs in fantasy points given up, so manage your expectations. I think Swift gets most of the receiving work out of this backfield, and they will be playing from behind most likely. I don't want to play Adrian Peterson this game. If I have Swift, I have to play him most likely. But you have to manage your expectations with this really stout Colts defense. Moving on now to wide receivers. The Colts have been poor through the air. They haven't really needed to throw the ball. They've been ahead in most games. Detroit is 25th best against the pass for wide receiver points scoring. It's a good matchup for these wide receivers, but I want to see it before I play any of them. I'm sure all of them, including T.Y. Hilton, are on the waivers. And I just don't believe in Phillip Rivers' ability mostly. That's my main. I just don't like Phillip Rivers. I don't think he's a viable fantasy quarterback to sustain the production that is needed for fantasy. Now breaking down Detroit, Kenny G in the past 4 games has been consistent, but he's not the wide receiver that you want or you expected. In the past 4 weeks, he has finished in PPR at wide receiver 22, 22, 21, 23. I mean, he's averaging the 22nd best. It's a solid wide receiver 2, but you kind of wanted him to be a mid-range to the back end wide receiver 1. And I don't know why Detroit isn't letting Stafford sling the ball. I mean, you saw at the end of that drive, in their game-winning drive against Atlanta, that he can sling that thing and he can get the job done through the air. With that said, Indianapolis is 12th best versus wide receivers in fantasy points given up. But if you have Kenny G, you're playing him, of course, despite this poor matchup. But if the Lions get behind early, like the Colts have shown to do consistently, Galladay could get some garbage time and put up some fantasy points. Moving on to tight ends now, there are 3 viable tight ends for the Colts. And as long as all 3 of them are healthy, it just takes away from each of their value. I think Trey Burton's the tight end to have in this tight end receiving core, with Mo Alley, Cox, and Jack Doyle rounding out the numbers. But Detroit is 3rd best versus tight ends. Deeper league, Trey Burton's my pick. Don't really want anything to do with them. Moving on now to the Detroit Lions. TJ Hawkinson, he's their premier tight end. However, the Colts are number 1 against the tight end position. But if this game does get out of hand and the Colts go up and are just kind of pounding the rock and pounding this game out, TJ Hawkinson could pick up some garbage time. He's a good player. But it kind of depends on how competitive the Lions are in this game. Now, moving on to the next matchup. Actually, moving back, I don't think I submitted my pick. I think the Colts win this game. Jonathan Taylor gets the job done on the ground. I think that's how the Colts win this game. Now, moving on to the next matchup. The Minnesota Vikings at 1-5 move to Green Bay to play the 5-1 Green Bay Packers. This is a 51.5 point over under with Green Bay 6.5 point favorites. I think Green Bay wins this game. They're just on fire right now. Aaron Rodgers is playing very well. He's trying to prove his doubters wrong, and he's on fire. Something I want to note of in this game that is really important for fantasy, in a potential bit of a shootout with not as good defenses, the weather I think is something to note of. The forecast is predicting 25 mile an hour winds with 40 mile an hour wind gusts in Green Bay. The temperatures is going to be in the 30s. And it's going to feel like it's in the 20s. So I think that overall we need to bump down the passing output as well as the kicking efficiency in this game. I think this game's going to be over fairly quick with most of the production coming on the ground with 2 very good running backs. Despite if Aaron Jones plays or not, I think Jamal Williams is very capable. So breaking down the quarterbacks, as I said, we need to bump down passing output, and Kirk Cousins, the current quarterback 24, don't have a lot of faith in him in this game. And so if you're streaming, I want a different option that isn't Kirk Cousins. Aaron Rodgers, if he's your quarterback, you're most likely playing him. He's the current QB 12. I don't have a lot of Minnesota's poor versus the pass. They're 25th best versus fantasy quarterbacks and points given up. But weather could play the significant role. I think we need to manage our expectations. Rodgers could put out a QB1 performance. However, I think that the job gets done on the ground this game. Now moving on to running backs, what I've been harping on this entire matchup preview. Minnesota with Dalvin Cook, he should be back, and I expect him to play and have a huge day. We'll talk about him later. this Green Bay run defense is the worst in the NFL in points given up to the running back as far as fantasy is concerned. And if Dalvin does not play, if he is held out, I think Alexander Madison is a great play. I think he's, despite 2 weeks ago not really performing the way that we expected and burning a few people's waiver priorities and fab dollars, I think he still gets the job done against this poor Green Bay Packers run D. Now, for Green Bay, if Aaron Jones plays, you play him. And what's notable about this is that Green Bay is typically conservative with injuries. I noted this. If he's out there, then you play him. If he's out and he does not play again, which is kind of looking the way this is going, then Jamal Williams is a great play. Minnesota's 17th best against run defense. They're about middle of the pack. But Jamal Williams is very capable. I believe he had 20 fantasy points last week. He is great. He's very talented, maybe the best backup RB2 in the league. Now, moving on to the wide receiver position. Minnesota, with their two-headed monster and Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, they're a bit confusing for me with these weather concerns. Thielen's top 12 in deep shots, air yards, and deep targets, which I actually thought that it was Justin Jefferson, but I looked up this stat earlier today, and I guess Thielen's the deep threat. But Jefferson is also top 30 in these as well, so we have to manage our expectations for both of these players. We probably don't have better options with these guys. I guess if you have Tyler Boyd maybe and you picked up Justin Jefferson, you're putting Tyler Boyd in. But as far as flex, I don't know. I guess you pick up Jamal Williams. You might play him instead of Justin Jefferson. It's kind of concerning, but if you don't have any other options due to bye or injuries, then you might have to play Justin Jefferson in this game. As a Justin Jefferson owner, I'm kind of in between. I picked up Jamal Williams today and just kind of waiting and holding out to see what happens. As far as Green Bay, you play Devontae Adams. You have to. He's one of the most talented wide receivers in this game and the league overall. But I don't want any other wide receivers. It's kind of the Packers have kind of shown that it's kind of a toss-up at the other positions, and you have to manage your expectations. But I think that they manufacture touches for him, and it'll still be a great play. Minnesota, worth noting, is third worst against fantasy wide receivers and points given up. Tight ends, I don't want any of them in this game. Tanyan has shown that he is fairly talented. If they go underneath to him more often, then I guess that he's a good play. But I don't want any of the Minnesota tight ends. I don't really want Tanyan either. I think that running back is the most productive position in this game by a long shot. Now, moving on, Green Bay wins this game. That is my pick for this game, is Green Bay to get the job done. Moving on now to the 0-7 New York Jets traveling to the 6-1 Kansas City Chiefs at Arrowhead. This is very funny. 49-point over-under. Kansas City 19.5 fantasy, or 19.5 point favorites. Or 19.5 point favorites. This is a line that you see in college games with like Alabama and Clemson. This is crazy. This is an NFL team in the New York Jets. This is going to be an interesting game, to say the least. Breaking down quarterbacks, Sam Darnold is getting the start. I do believe, with him coming off of injury with his shoulder issues that he's had. He gets the 10th best defense against fantasy quarterbacks. I guess that if this is a 2-quarterback league, you have Sam Darnold. You start him because you think that the Chiefs go up early, which will happen, and the Jets just have to throw the ball all game. If you got Pat Mahomes, you're starting him, no question. New York Jets are 11th best against fantasy points given up to the quarterback position. But I think that's more to do with them getting down very early and then teams just running all over them. With that noted, moving on to running backs, I want to break down this Kansas City backfield. This is Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell's revenge game against the New York Jets. We all know this narrative going into this game. It's going to be interesting to see what happens as far as how they split carries and touches, and the receiving work is what I really want to watch because Le'Veon Bell's known as a receiver, a receiving back especially. But with the current injury to Sammy Watkins, the Chiefs could split him into the slot more often and have them both out there, which I think would be just great for the Chiefs overall. With that said, the New York Jets are 26th best against running backs in fantasy points given up. I think that you can play both of these guys as the Chiefs will go up by maybe 35 at halftime. I mean, we don't know what could happen here, and then they just have to run the ball. With that said, the New York Jets backfield breakdown. Samaje, is it Samaje Perine or is it just, I don't really know. But with that said, Perine, it's LaMichael Perine, not Samaje Perine. Samaje Perine is the running back for the Bengals now. LaMichael Perine, he got 35 fantasy. 35? That'd be crazy. He got 13 fantasy points last week with a touchdown. I think he's only a deeper league play. They'll be behind all game. It's just simple as that. Now, moving on to wide receiver breakdown, the Jets. Jamison Crowder, they're their lone bright point this season overall. He's been great for them. He is questionable, and so you need to monitor him this week. But if he plays, he's a solid wide receiver too, despite Kansas City being fourth best against fantasy wide receivers and points given up. For Kansas City, you're starting Tyreek. If I were to have to pick between Mecole Hardman and Robinson and Byron Pringle, the K-Stater, I pick Mecole Hardman. I think he's just a better talent. This game could get out of hand very fast, so they might only throw the ball like 20, 25 times. We don't really know. And with that said, a small piece of pie, just not enough to really go around, I don't think, for that second wide receiver spot. For tight ends now, New York Jets, I kind of broke this down in my doc as, I typed it out as New York Jets, Chris Herndon, no. Kansas City, Kelsey, yes. Simple as that. It's as simple as that. No need to go crazy with this breakdown. With that said, Kansas City wins this game, in my opinion, and in probably everyone's opinion. Moving on now to the last game that we will break down. The 5-2 Los Angeles Rams take on the Miami Dolphins in Miami. The Dolphins at 3-3. This game is currently a 46-point over-under, with the Rams being 3.5-point favorites. The major storyline of this game is Tua getting a start and breaking Ryan Fitzpatrick's heart. It's incredibly hard to watch that Ryan Fitzpatrick Zoom interview. If you saw that, you know what I'm talking about. But breaking down the quarterback position, as I said, Tua's first start, he gets the absolute privilege of playing Aaron Donald, an absolute beast of a man. With that said, the Rams are sixth best against fantasy quarterbacks and points given up. This could be ugly, and we get to really see what Tua is, how talented he is, and what he does with this Miami Dolphins offense. Moving on to the Rams now, Jared Goff hasn't been supporting these two wide receivers and Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp that we have seen in the past. And it's because they don't need to. They've been very efficient on the ground. And also, this is not the porous Miami Dolphins defense that we have seen in the past. Currently, they are very good in the air. Byron Jones and Xavier Woods have been very good. They're shutting down wide receivers, and they're ninth best. The Miami defense as a whole is ninth best against fantasy quarterbacks and points given up. I think this game gets kind of out of hand on the ground with the Rams. Breaking down that running back position further, the Rams get against Miami. Miami's 25th best on the ground as far as fantasy points given up to running backs. Darrell Henderson, I think, is a good play this week. He gets to be a RB2, a very solid one in my opinion. And Malcolm Brown might be as well. We kind of saw a bit of a 50-50 split in this past game against Chicago, but I prefer Henderson to Brown. Henderson kind of has that breakout talent and breakaway ability. This could be a big week for both or either one of them. We don't really know what could happen, but I think that the Rams pound this rock. For Miami, Myles Gaskin's been a huge highlight of this offense. He is the 10th best, but however, he gets to go up against the 10th best run D in the Los Angeles Rams. Miami could slow the game down and kind of help out Tua and give the ball to Myles Gaskin, so that's something to keep an eye on. This also could be a game that gets over very fast, as I highlighted in the Green Bay Packers versus Minnesota Vikings game. This could be major running through both offenses. And I think Gaskin gets the job done and finishes around RB16. Moving on to wide receivers now, the Rams. A big question mark in this wide receiving core. Can we lock in Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp into lineups without any question anymore? I don't think so, and especially not this game. Miami, as I highlighted with Byron Jones and Xavier Woods, they're exceptional. They're shutting down offenses through the air. Miami is 14th best against fantasy wide receivers and points given up, and I'm really managing expectations in this game, and I'm not expecting much from these two. With that said, moving on now to the Miami receiving options. This is a big question mark with Tua coming in now, of course. I think that Devontae Parker is a play. You have to play him probably if he's on your team, but you have to manage expectations because the Rams are second best against fantasy wide receivers. Devontae Parker plays inside quite a bit as well, and Jalen Ramsey is transferred into that slot corner. It could be a difficult game for these Miami wide receivers. With that said, I think this Rams D is a good play this week, and they could manufacture a defensive touchdown against Tua with his first game, and I'll talk about that later on. Now tight ends. Tyler Higbee is questionable. He missed last week with a hand injury for the Rams. Gerald Everett, he also missed practice yesterday on Wednesday with an illness. And with that said, Miami's second best against tight ends. I don't like either of them, especially if both play. They kind of eat into each other's production. Miami now, breaking down really Mike Gesicki. The Rams are 23rd best against tight ends, so this is where Miami could manufacture some offensive output. And Gesicki, however, has been really inconsistent this year, and he could have a good game. So now moving on to my prediction for this game. I think that the Rams win this game. I think an important note to add here is that the Rams traveling west to east. It's a bit of a narrative as these games happen. When West Coast teams travel to the East Coast, and especially these noon kickoffs, they get off to a slow start, and that could happen in this game. Now, moving on to starts of the week. I'm going to give... So basically with this segment, I want to give two players in each position, including defenses, who I think could have huge weeks. I'm not going to pick like Devontae Adams, D-Hop, like those kind of players, Christian McCaffrey when he plays, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce. I'm not going to pick those types of players often. I might pick them occasionally. However, I want to pick sort of like lower production players so far this season and kind of predict like a breakout game for them. So starting at the quarterback position, Jimmy G, he gets Seattle, which has been very profitable for those teams who at the quarterback position who get to play Seattle. He hasn't been pushing the ball down the field at all. If you watch that Patriots game, it was just all dump-offs and just little 18-inch touch passes. And the fact is he doesn't need to. Seattle is 31st best, second worst against fantasy quarterbacks and points given up. Last week he only had 7 points for the Pats, and I think this game turns into a shootout with Russ playing the way he is and with the 49ers running the ball as well as they are. I think that Jimmy G throws a bunch of screens to Brandon Ayuk and swing passes out to Tevin Coleman if he plays, or Jermichael Hasty. I think that Jimmy G gets the job done against Seattle. Moving on now to Teddy Bridgewater. He plays tonight. He gets Atlanta. And Atlanta is the worst against fantasy quarterbacks and points given up. I think this game turns into a shootout as well. I think it's going to be a very good game to watch tonight. And I think Teddy Bridgewater moves into a QB1 performance this week as well as Jimmy G. Now, moving on to the running back position. If Dalvin Cook is healthy and he does play the rest of this week in practice and he is healthy and plays Sunday with this poor weather game, and also considering Green Bay is the worst against fantasy running backs and points given up, I think Dalvin has a monster game. Maybe they manage his touches and kind of hold him to a pitch count. And even if they do that, I think that he puts in an incredible RB1 performance. Maybe not number 1 overall, but definitely top 12. Jonathan Taylor, I've been talking about it when I talked about it when I broke down the Detroit Lions game with the Colts. The Lions are 28th best against fantasy running backs and points given up. And this is a turning point in the season for Jonathan Taylor. I'm calling it now. He will become the workhorse back. He will get 15, 18 plus touches in this game. And I think that Indy want him to become that as well. Now that they're moving into the second half of the season, they need to kind of control the game more, run the ball, and get those wins and get into the playoffs. And I think that Jonathan Taylor gets them into the playoffs. Also, Detroit could go down early, and then the Colts just have to pound the rock the rest of the game. Moving on now to the wide receiver position. To match my Teddy Bridgewater take, I'm going with Robbie Anderson. I think that Robbie Anderson gets the job done in the air. He scored 1 touchdown this season coming in week 1, and I think another 1 or 2 comes tonight. Atlanta is 28th best against wide receivers and fantasy points given up. And this game could possibly turn into a shootout. I think this is going to be an entertaining game tonight. Tyler Boyd is my other pick at wide receiver breakout games in week 8. I think Joe Burrow has found his weapon in Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd is talented. He's done this for 3 years now. He has a great matchup against Tennessee. 29th best against fantasy wide receivers and points given up. And Tennessee could blow this game out. They could pound the rock, and they could hit A.J. Brown on a few deep shots. And this could cause Cincinnati to throw the ball a lot, as I touched earlier in the breakdown. Moving on now to tight end matchups, or not matchups. Moving on now to tight end starts of the week. I actually just had some breaking news. Aaron Jones did not practice today. Aaron Jones did not practice. That is huge to note of. Pick up Jamal Williams if you have him. And as well, Joe Mixon missed another day of practice today. Huge breaking news right now as of 1:22 p.m. on October 29th. Moving on now to tight ends. My tight end breakouts, I have Rob Gronkowski. We got big old Gronk over there. I think he's going to get the job done. As long as this game happens, I think that's something to note of. just saw something with Twitter that there was some sort of positive test in this game. Yeah, the Buccaneers equipment staff member tested positive, according to Adam Schefter. So something to note: we have positive tests from the Giants and the Bucs. Pay attention to this game. Talk to your commissioner. Understand your backup options if this game does not happen. But if this game does happen, Gronk will go off. He's I'm predicting a top 5 output this game. Godwin is out this week, and the past 3 weeks, Rob Gronkowski ranks number 2 in targets, 1st in air yards, 3rd in catches, 3rd in yards, 2nd in touchdowns, 2nd in PPR points. Gronk is breaking out. He's turning into the player that we know and love. And the Giants, the New York Football Giants, are 9th versus the tight end, but I still see Gronk just breaking out and catching more of those closer to line of scrimmage catches without Chris Godwin there. And I think that Gronk gets into the end zone this game as well. Now, my second pick is Richard Rodgers, tight end for the Philadelphia Eagles. He gets to play Dallas, who is 21st against the tight end. Dallas is poor, and last week Richard Rodgers got 14.5 fantasy points, which was the number 6 tight end on the week. I think he gets the job done again versus this poor Dallas team who's kind of imploding. I think that if he's on your waivers and you don't have a solid tight end like a Kelsey, like a Kittle, like a Waller, I think that Richard Rodgers is a great play. I think that Gronk outscores Richard Rodgers, but I think that Richard Rodgers gets another top 8 week. Now, moving on to defenses. This is going to be the last part of the show. Defensive breakouts. I'm going with the Philly defense as they get Dallas, as I talked about just earlier with the Richard Rodgers breakdown. They're bad right now. They have DiNucci starting for them, their third-string quarterback. This game could get ugly. I think you fire up your Philly defense, and you could get a defensive touchdown and definitely some turnovers. Now, for the last part of this show, the second defense that I pick is the Los Angeles Rams. They get Tua in his first start. We get to see what kind of player Tua is, but I think that the Rams could force some turnovers. They got a lot of huge name players on this team, and they could get multiple turnovers, maybe even a touchdown. I think that this game is interesting. So that will do it for this Thursday show, October 29th, 2020. Tomorrow, I will break down the rest of the matchups that we have left. I will provide my picks for those games, and as well, I might be joined by a friend to help break down these games. Thank you very much for watching. Great show coming out tomorrow. Tune in tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.